Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. My name is Jed Herne, author of The Thunder Heist, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, starting with Rob J. Hayes.
That's me. I'm Rob J. Hayes. I'm author of, we'll go with The War Eternal, because, hang on, which way am I moving there? Artwork.
If you're listening on the podcast, Rob is just showing off an awesome War Eternal poster that he has behind him in his office. You can check that out on our YouTube channel if you want to see the version of that. It's glorious, by Felix Ortiz. It's very nice. And our third host, Michael R. Fletcher.
Greetings, I am Michael R. Fletcher, author of Beyond Redemption and the Manifest Delusions books, and some other shit.
I love how posh you are today. It's like we've got Michael R. Fletcher from the 1950s.
Very English today.
Why didn't you ever mention the the manifesto?
Oh, yeah, because no one's gonna buy it, no one's gonna read it because it's not fantasy and no one gives a shit.
You should always mention it.
Okay.
I
wrote this
as well.
real world thriller called The Millennial Manifesto. It's a fucking fantastic book. It's like the hell's that guy's name? It's like Tarantino did a couple of lines of coke and then smoked crack and wrote a novel.
That is an amazing pitch for it.
It's brilliant.
What's
go
it
and
about?
buy it.
Yeah, go and buy it. One friend read it and said, dude, if anyone reads this, there will be rioting in the streets. Happily, no one's read it, so there's been no rioting.
Apart from your friend who went rioted in the streets alone.
Yes.
Just one person out there with their placard waving it at the sky.
This is a riot!
Police officers, sorry, legally you need more than one person for this to be called a riot. This is just
someone being a dick. This is
the actions of a lone madman. That's cool. Okay, yeah, check that out. That sounds cool. So that's the Millennial Manifesto, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Cool.
It's about millennials rising up and waging war on corporate America.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's corporate terrorism.
Okay.
It's a brilliant idea.
There you go. All right. You heard it here first. The new political movement of the 2020s. Took me a while to figure out what decade we were in there. Anyway, today's episode topic comes from a listener question from one of our patrons. Comes from Marcella, who asks, how do you handle confusion about your world building? How much reader flailing or hand-holding is acceptable to you? So I guess the kind of way to think about this patron question is, to what extent do you kind of throw your readers into the world building for a big epic fantasy world versus hold their hand while you teach them about the intricacies of your world building? Who wants to sort of take the first bite at this question?
Yeah. Rob, you got something?
Okay. Well, I tend to prefer more of a sort of like throw them in the deep end type thing, because I feel that to really handhold a reader through your world building requires quite a bit of exposition. And I don't particularly like doing like whole sections of exposition. I prefer to have the world like bleed into the page just from character interactions and maybe a bit of internal monologuing and you know, all sorts of stuff like that. So I find that the best way for me to handle it personally is to drop the reader in the deep end, but in ways that are intriguing to them. So, you know, I might mention like, here's this little bit of this little tidbit about the magic system sort of thing, and you know, I won't expand upon that. So at that point, it's like, okay, what's going on there? But it's enough that might, you know, tease your interest. So you're like, ooh, I want to know more. And then as the book goes, that's one of the extra sort of like things that I'll add more layers upon to help explain it to its fullest. It's like, okay, so you start with the bare bones, and then you add a bit of sort of like, you know, musculature, and then maybe a few organs, and then, you know, by the end of it, you've got the skin, and then you've got a full human being.
Didn't realize you were a biologist. There you go.
All right. Yeah, I'm with Rob. I'm in the throw him in the deep end camp. I think hand holding is awful. I will add though that I cheat, and I'm all about the cheating. So the two ways which I have caught myself cheating and which I can't do for the next books because it'll be predictable. One, start with a character who wakes up and has no idea who they are and doesn't remember anything about the world, a la Blackstone Heart. Which means now the reader is forced to learn about the world as the character does. It is a brilliant technique. Don't do it. It's mine.
Yeah,
Exclusive
you're certainly the
patent.
first person to ever discover that technique.
For sure. I am the first. It will never be done again, at least not as well as I did it. The second way I cheat is not quite exposition, but chapter epigraphs about the world, but it's never just explaining something. It's always an oblique way of sort of showing the world. Little philosophical quotes, educational treaties, political rants of, off-screen characters. It's basically just sort of helping make the world seem much larger than what the reader is ever going to see. You'll hear about other parts of the world and wars that went on in the past and, all that sort of stuff. But it's never like a direct, oh, and this is how this works, because that's exposition, that's handholding, and it's boring as shit.
Yeah, I think
be careful with epigraphs though, because when your book's sort of 30 to 60 odd chapters long, it's a lot of work.
It is.
Having to write a whole extra book just for the epigraphs.
Yeah. I know with Beyond Redemption, with the Manifest Delusions books, they all have epigraphs. And so I'd get my number of chapters. I'd have a separate document for epigraphs. And a lot of them are written intentionally to sort of hint at shit coming down later, sort of to prepare the reader. Like there'll be like a little bit talking about like how a specific delusion works. And that has to go much earlier in the document than in the book, than in, when the reader actually runs into that. So I'd write all my epigraphs separately and then sort of port them into the main document piece by piece, sort of picking and choosing where each one went. That worked much better than actually trying to do them on the fly.
And that's
so you do
way
them
of
batch,
cheating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you can kind of like structure them throughout the whole story as well and rearrange them appropriately. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Rather than
so like if I write a chapter that's about sociopaths, while I'm either while I'm writing that chapter or when I finish it, then I will write the epigraph for that chapter, sort of the epigraph talking about what happens in that chapter, but put it much earlier in the book. But they get scrambled around a lot, like moved.
Sure. So I might just come to the defense of the hand-holding route for world building entry now for a little bit. Because I think hand-holding probably has like a bit of a negative connotation to it, but I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the approach of easing readers into your story if you want. And I think a couple of ways that you can do that without it being boring or uninteresting is to kind of start at a smaller scale than what your story will eventually build to. So if you're doing this story that has, let's say, like 10 different magic systems in it, all these multiple nations warring each other, you totally could just start with, a battle scene that is showing all of that in its whole epic scale. Or you could start with, a couple of characters in a smaller town, sort of just exploring, one aspect of the magic systems throughout your story. And by no means is that like necessarily hand-holding in the sense of you have one character being like, as you know, Bob, when I drink this serum, it gives me the super strength to hurl these bricks across the village square. But it allows you to, kind of teach readers how your story works in a way that is not going to put them off and is going to like intimidate them with the mass of complex magic systems that you've created. And you see this a lot in like particular, sort of cultivation and progression fantasy, where it starts off with, here is the first building block of a power.
There's always a teacher teaching the student about the magic system, and the teacher literally just explains it to the student. I mean, that's handholding. That's just like, like if
well,
you
to be honest,
this metal, this is what happens, and you can do this, and it'll last for this long. Do you have it?
It's the same though. It's the same as you do with a character who wakes up and doesn't know who they are or anything. What you're basically doing is you're having a character who is unknowledgeable, who acts as a sort of a substitute for the reader. That character has to have things explained to them so that the reader knows.
Yeah, I think one way or another, it can be a really useful tool to have a character who is curious about the world, whether that's because they are amnesic and they need to figure out where they've come from, whether that's because they are a young student and they want to learn how to master specific abilities, or whether it's because they are already an experienced character, but they are doing some detective work and they're trying to investigate things. Like if you're one of the few people who have seen this niche TV show called Squid Games, you might know that there is a police officer in that. And I don't think the show functions without it, because that police officer is able to investigate things about the machinations behind the games that you wouldn't see from the perspective of the characters. And that's why you'll often see in books some sort of character who is doing detective work, is trying to investigate things, and their function is, you know, to first of all make you interested in unraveling those mysteries, and then also it's a way to provide exposition that isn't just for the purpose of exposition. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's coming up with trying to avoid the negative downsides of hand-holding is your exposition shouldn't just be there for the sake of exposition. It should be doing something else. So if you do have a teacher who is training a main character in how to use the magic system, hopefully that's also doing something with their character arcs. Hopefully it's building the conflict of the story. Hopefully it's kind of developing the relationship between those characters. And it's not just, you know, a 20-page essay on here's how all the magic systems work and here's all the different races in this world, blah, 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 blah. Would you guys like agree with that, do you reckon? Or do you think there's nuances there that I'm missing?
I would say there's always different ways to do it. Personally, I would agree. I tend to dislike long periods of exposition within books. I don't feel that they often work. With the occasional exceptions, such as Expositurnus. I know Dirk isn't here, but he does a lot of exposition in his Paternus books and somehow makes it work.
Sure.
Because he breaks rules.
Yeah, that's just the thing. If you do it well, it doesn't matter. You can just brutally handhold, explain everything, but if it's done right, if it's done really well, no one cares.
Nope.
Very true.
There is no one way to do it. There's no perfect way to do it. It's part of the joy of it. You've got to find the one that's right to you. This is like the one bit of advice our show comes down to every time, which is find what's right for you, the right way to do it for you.
Yeah.
Yes, you can try and base it on what other people are telling you, what us fools are trying to, impart our knowledge and all that lot. But the reality is, it's got to be personal. It's got to be, you got to find the way that works, that works for you, that you can do and you can do well.
Yeah, and you have to find it for each book, because you'll find that thing that works for you for that book. And then the next book, you'll be like, shit, that's not going to work here. And so you have to find it again.
Yeah, like what you found, Fletcher, like with the last two books having used the kind of amnesic character trope, discovering more about themselves. Now you've realized, can't pull that trick a third time. People will see it coming.
Yep.
I think Rob, the quote that kind of sums that up really nicely is one of my favorite Bruce Lee quotes, which is absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. And really, we could probably just like have our podcast is 10 seconds and it's just that. And that's just what we play every week, the same quote. Because I think that's what it comes down to with every bit of writing advice is, here's some thoughts. Do they work for you? Great. Do they not work for you? No worries. Find something else. Do they sometimes?
I think that's it.
Go for it.
Yeah, we like to call ourselves a writing advice podcast, but what we're actually doing is we're saying, look, these are the tools that we use. These are the tools that we use. They work for us, but that doesn't mean they're going to work for you. So here's another set of tools that you could possibly use. These ones might work for you. You might need to use some of these tools and some of these tools, but these tools, they're all trash. That wasn't me specifically pointing at Fletcher there.
I thought you were pointing at me, so we both feel judged.
This tool is trash.
Take it back to the hardware store. So
I'll tell you what, I'm constantly surprised by how similar me and Fletcher's processes are, actually.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're both the chaotic monkeys of this show. Me and Dirk over here trying to outline things, trying to come up with formulas, putting things in spreadsheets, and you guys are like, we just vibe it up, man.
Yeah, not this time. This next project, I got 15,000 words or more of world building. I am going to plot out every single fucking chapter before I start writing, and because I've never done this before, I'm
Awesome.
actually, and this is insane, I have broken the book into, and no one's done this, is totally original, 3 acts.
Whoa.
No.
This is a
And
game changer,
I'm figuring
man.
out what the main thing for each act is. It's crazy. Unheard of. I'll
That's
report
next
back later
level.
when it's done and let you know how brilliant it worked out, or maybe.
Dear God.
Yeah.
You're such an innovator.
I know. It's amazing.
This is unique. I think this could change the face of storytelling forever. Imagine 3 acts of structure that has been outlined carefully.
Mhm.
I mean,
Incredible.
next thing you know, you're going to be saying that you've got a hero who goes on a journey.
No, a hero's journey, perhaps.
Well, actually, that's good. I might use that.
Wow. Okay, Fletcher is truly breaking new ground in the writing world. That is remarkable. Do we have any other last thoughts before we wrap up this response to Marcella's question?
Marcello,
Marcella, one of our patrons.
Marcella.
So be nice to
Marcella?
them.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm genuinely like. There's the Italian version where your C's often are ch, or they turn into a K. I'm just wondering if you're butchering somebody's name. We can talk about that for half an hour.
We can talk about that
Ooh.
after.
I love
Hey,
the way
maybe that's
Fletcher
a
just
good.
flipped it there.
Yeah, that
It's
was
like,
well done.
you know,
Well power played.
Jed goes in for a punch and
Turns out
Fletcher
he's
just
the
brushes it
asshole.
aside and uppercut.
Fletcher takes the punch and flips me over his back. That's actually probably not a bad idea. Is when you do send in a listener question, if you want to like just sort of send in the pronunciation of your name as well, that'd be super handy. And then that way I'll get it right.
We can have conversations like this where we murder it for 5 minutes.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Thanks
So
for
yeah,
joining
do we have any other last comments on this kind of topic before we wrap up this episode?
I think we're good.
We have solved it. Absolutely nothing else to discuss on this topic.
We nailed the topic, whatever it was.
Yeah, I'd be curious to kind of hear from you listeners and watchers actually, like what extent of kind of hand holding versus throwing in the deep end do you like when you're reading your stories? Do you like things that kind of ease you into it a bit? Do you like things that just throw you in the deep end? Let us know in either the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, you can email wizardswarriorswords@gmail.com, which that email is also down in the show notes. Oh, and also if you are on Spotify and you're listening to this podcast on Spotify, they have a new feature where we can add polls to the episode and we can get like feedback from all of you, which is pretty cool. Not sponsored by Spotify, just mention that.
Feedback. These guys suck.
Yeah. Oh,
Are we sure we want this?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's cool. So yeah, I'll add, if you are listening on Spotify, do just scroll down and see if there's a poll down there that is asking this question. And hopefully I remembered to add it. Only you can find out. But yeah, anyway, that's a good place to wrap up this episode. Thank you, Marcella, for sending that question in. Special shout out to our high tier patrons, Daniel and Christopher. If you want to help support the show on Patreon and get priority question access to the show, please head to patreon.com/Wizards Warriors Words, and the link to that is also down below. Thank you everybody for watching/listening to us nail yet another writing suggestions topic, because we're not writing advice, as Robert said, we are writing suggestions. And we're
just presenting you with all of our tools.
That's it.
but in a non-filthy way.
Yeah.
That's it.
You mind out the gutter.
And on that note, that has been another episode. Thank you everybody for watching or listening, and we will see you next week. Bye everybody.
Troll.